Hi, I'm Susan Hersh from Meet the Experts. Donald Unger, the author of Men Can, interviewed several couples on co-parenting and fathers who are the primary caregivers for their children. These men have decided to stay at home while their wives commute on a daily basis to the office. But what I really found fascinating about the book is the parallel. Men, they want respect, they want the title, and they also feel that they're just as adequate in the parental role as a woman. Meanwhile, women for decades, they've been fighting in the workplace for exactly the same things. Today, Donald is here with me to discuss fatherhood in America and how it has changed over the past several decades. Hey, Donald.
Hi, Susan.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Deborah Ellis, an attorney, she represented you against Mobil Oil Corporation, just a big company in the U.S., and I'm just so surprised that you took on a corporation like that. I know that you wanted them to comply with state law. You wanted them to install the changing tables for babies in the restroom, and you wanted this done not only in Connecticut but also New York State. Why did you take on this challenge, and did you think you could win?
I was pretty sure that I could win. I mean, I had the law on my side, and I would say I was suffering kind of classic parental irritation. I would bring Rebecca down from Massachusetts down the Merritt Parkway to New York City on a regular basis, and I would need to change her diaper, and I couldn't do it in the men's room. And, it seemed like often it was snowing or raining or something like that. I'd have to change her in the back seat with the door open. It'd be getting wet. I'd be cold. She'd be unhappy. And I knew that, in the women's room they had changing tables, and that by law, if they had them in the women's room, they're supposed to have them in the men's room.
And how long did it take you to actually win the case?
I think it probably took about 8 months. It didn't really come to court. Deborah Ellis was originally the legal director for the National Organization for Women. She's also a professor of law at NYU, and her husband had been a stay-at-home parent, and he had fought the same battle against the Lord & Taylor department store chain in New York City. So sort of the family had accumulated the information one needs to make that argument. She wrote a very good letter, and Mobil Oil caved.
You dedicated a chapter in your book to Kevin Knosman. He is the first man to allege sex discrimination against the state because he had asked for extended leave. And this is after his daughter Paige was born and his wife Kim had a lot of complications. Kim was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and when she came out of the hospital, she then had to be bedridden. So it was crucial for Kevin to be able to stay at home. Why did his case drag on for 10 years, especially that the Family Medical Leave Act was already in place?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to understand. He was the first person to file a suit, as you said, under the Family and Medical Leave Act, which was the first law that Bill Clinton signed into law. Kevin was a Maryland state trooper, and I think to some degree maybe the kind of job that he had something to do with that. I think that the state police were not sympathetic to a man who wanted to do something that didn't seem as masculine. And perhaps after they got themselves into the position of fighting him, they couldn't quite back down. I mean, interestingly, he took leave after the birth of his second child. They granted him leave to stay home to take care of his second child while they were still fighting the case related to denying leave for the first child.
That's such an awkward situation. It really is.
I think, bureaucracies sometimes behave in the same sort of pig-headed and selfish and silly ways that human beings do. You take some position in an argument, you just can't back down out of it.
In your book, you discuss various movies and TV commercials. I want to talk about Kramer versus Kramer that came out in 1979. I remember that movie clearly. I was in high school, and that's also the same year that California passed the joint custody law, first state in the United States to do that. They've always been liberal out there in California. So just to refresh everybody's memory, just in case they forgot what that movie's about, Ted, who's Dustin Hoffman, plays the father. Joanna is Meryl Streep. She's the mother. And she abandons them for a year and a half, and then she comes back and decides that she wants Billy back, her son. And guess what? The court appointed her, and she then had Billy. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm not going to go into that right now, but I'm curious because just a year before that movie came out, your mother actually left you and your sister under the care of your dad. So he became your primary caretaker. So now your dad, you've written this book. I have to ask you to rate your dad on his performance as a parent?
I would say I am ultimately satisfied. I have no lasting complaints. I think it's really difficult to sort of take people out of context and time. You know, my father's a trained engineer. He was always sort of very functionalist. I think it's interesting because my daughter's complaint from the time that she was very young, you know, the time she was 8 or 9, she felt that adults in general and her parents in particular shouldn't be treating, you know, should be treating her more like an adult.
Did you feel that your father should have been treating you more like an adult?
No, my father very much treated me and treated my sister like adults from a very early age. And it's interesting because that was difficult in some ways. You know, his attitude was sort of, you're going to do what you want to do. I'll tell you to do this or not do it. Whatever you do, it's your responsibility to deal with whatever the consequences are.
I also think a lot has to do with just in general, parents today are afraid because they don't know who they can trust. You just hear the craziest stories. You don't know who your neighbors are sometimes.
Well, but I also think that that's false. I mean, I think we hear all of these things. I don't think that kids today are any less safe than we were. I think there were the same kinds of things going on. The problem is that once you sort of depopulate the street, I mean, once the sort of standard for middle-class parenting is you drive kids everywhere and you don't let them roam around alone, you can't be the only parent who goes against that and lets your kid out into the empty street.
I wanted to go over with you, in your book, you dissect a lot of TV commercials, and I think this is so interesting. And after I read the book, I realized that you were absolutely right, how in commercials men used to be shown completely inept at taking care of their kids and doing these crazy things on commercials that a mother would never do. And so I'm curious, do you feel that men are still being portrayed like this today in advertising? And now I'm talking about all advertising because there's so many new media venues going on. I'm just curious what your take is.
I think the doofus dad lives on commercials and in media. I think we also, you know, we have some positive images of men, and I think that's coming on. But I think there's still a sort of seductive appeal to incompetent men. You know, there's a kind of, you know, women are mothers and men are children. You know, you can't trust men to do things right. And I think that's really unfortunate in the sense that, you know, it offends me a little bit as a man. But I think it really hurts women much more because what it says to women is you would be irresponsible if you let men do these things. So it's not that we don't want to, you know, share in domestic work. It's not that we don't want to be parents. It's that we just can't because we're inept. Sorry, honey, you have to do it. And that's, you know, for professional women, I mean, that's devastating. You can't, you know, you can't have a full professional life if you don't have some reasonable sharing of domestic work. You know, particularly childcare.
I did, though, see recently a diaper commercial with a dad, and his daughter was beautifully dressed.
And he got it right.
Dressed, and he got it right. She had her sneakers on, and she was crawling up some stairs, and he actually had the stroller slung onto his shoulder, and you could tell he was trying to help her learn how to take her first steps. And I thought it was a precious commercial, and this actually was on maybe last month when I just had finished your book, and I was like, well, that's a positive commercial for a man.
I mean, I think that the market gives you sort of interesting information, right? I mean, to the degree that there are positive images of effective, competent fathers who are involved, that says that there's some demographic who wants to see that. Now, it may be that that's aimed more at women than at men, that women want to see this, and maybe it's sort of still a fantasy, and competent men are still kind of, you know, not as common on the ground as they ought to be. But I think things are clearly changing, and I think you certainly see that generationally.
My next guest is Rebecca Unger. This is Donald's daughter, and when I was interviewing Donald, I asked him if he would bring his daughter because Donald and his wife have a co-parenting relationship. Rebecca has grown up with both of her parents being at home and also in the office as well, but I wanted to get Rebecca's perspective on her relationship with Dad. So my first question for you is, what do you think you've taught your dad about parenting and your perspective on parenting?
Well, frankly, since I was about 7 years old, I've been campaigning to be unparented as much as possible.
I'm shocked.
Wanted to be treated like a roommate, basically. Not so much in terms of privileges. I don't expect my parents to go out and get ridiculous illegal items for me. But I want them to listen to my opinions, and I think they do. They take my input on household issues, and I appreciate that.
And what do you think your father has actually instilled in you as far as values?
I think the number one thing he's taught me is not to take things at face value. I remember as young as maybe 5 years old, if we were watching a politician on TV and I said I liked him, he would elaborate. He would tell me something that wasn't mentioned in the speech. He would have me examine
Because he knew the skinny in the newspaper.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, of course, where did you get your sense of style? Does your mother or father have any influence on you?
Neither of my parents, to put it politely, is interested in fashion. It must be some latent gene.
On that note, since you're turning 16 next month, I want to congratulate you, sweet
Thank you.
16, and thank you so much for being here with me. And Donald, thank you also for your time. And it's so interesting to hear about your book, Men Can. I think that it's very thought-provoking, and I'm so happy to have met you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Until the next time, I'm Susan Hersh from Meet the Experts.